Among the actresses considered for the role of Daphne, Perez was near the top of the list. Ultimately, the producers decided to go with a British caretaker instead of a Latina one, so Perez obviously didn't get the role, but it's an interesting look into what might have been. Hello, and welcome to Frasier Fridays, where all the salads are tossed and all the eggs are scrambled. Today, we're looking at the 36th episode of Frasier, entitled Roz in the Doghouse. Not only is this the first episode to feature Roz's name in the title, but it's the first episode to air in 1995, originally premiering on January 3rd, 1995. This week and next week are our last 2 weeks of season that are in production order, with production code 212 showing up here and 213 next week. Roz in the Doghouse came back from the Christmas break with a nice high rating of 24.1 million viewers, a solid climb of 3 million viewers from the prior outing, and a good enough rating to be the second highest rated episode of the season. Though this rating is good, it seems much less interesting when compared to the Seinfeld and Friends ratings this week. Seinfeld comes back from the Christmas break and goes up just under 10 million viewers, to an insane 36.6 million viewers. If I'm not mistaken, this is good enough to make this week's outing the 5th highest rated episode of the series overall. Last week, I mentioned Friends ratings were going to do interesting things after the new year, and here we can see that they do. Friends didn't go up near as much as Seinfeld, but it did gain more than 6.5 million viewers from before the break, which was easily enough to best Frasier, which is going to become pretty common going forward. I'm not sure if the increase at this point in time is because Friends started to catch on and become the big hit it was destined to be, or if it's just picking up from the coattails of Seinfeld. Either way, it's interesting that Friends is starting to do so well here, and it's really crazy how much the ratings jumped from the prior episode. Roz in the Doghouse is a James Burrows directed episode and has a Ramberg and Flett script. All three members of the Frasier creative team have done a lot of work on the series, and all three have quite a few episodes left in their respective tanks. Burrows, like Ackerman, is a really solid director who typically doesn't do anything too fancy behind the camera, but just makes a solid storyline. With that said, this week, he'll do some pretty cool and different stuff from what we typically get in a Frasier episode, which helps to show just what a great eye Burrows has for sitcom direction. Ramberg and Flett are master comedy writers, and easily one of my favorite sets of writers on the show. This week, we start the episode out with the return of the Lights All Over the City intro, which is making its second appearance for the season and its 7th appearance overall. From there, as we get into the actual meat of the episode, we start this week out with a guest caller scene. Our guest caller this week is another musical guest caller with Carly Simon. She's had a career as both a singer and a children's author. Simon is probably best known for the song You're So Vain, which was a 4-time gold certified record and hit the number 1 spot in both the US and Canadian music charts. Simon also had a number 2 charting song with the theme to the James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me. She has had a number of other songs that charted and has released over 20 studio albums since 1971. Throughout the late 80s and 90s, Simon also wrote 5 children's books in addition to her music, and has frequently appeared as herself in numerous television and movie roles. In 2022, Simon was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and in 2023, the Rolling Stone ranked her as the 31st greatest adult contemporary artist of all time. In addition to these accomplishments, Simon wrote and recorded songs for 3 different Winnie the Pooh movies in the early 2000s, which is a really nice and different kind of project for such a major recording artist to take. She's another nice addition to the growing collection of musical artists who have acted as guest callers on the show. As Simon's call ends, we get an interesting conversation between Frasier and Roz, comparing the virtues of dating a divorcee as opposed to someone who has never been married. This is a really fun back and forth, and is actually something I could have seen happening between Frasier and Sam back on Cheers. It's a delightful conversation, and although not super funny, it is a great character moment for the two co-workers. As the conversation ends, Roz hurries out of the room and takes a fall over Bulldog. Okay, this scene is absolutely ridiculous, and the view we get of Roz going down from the broadcasting booth is just a fantastic window shot, and I'm sure is actually hiding a mattress for her to safely fall on. We also get to see most of the KACL crew when Roz takes her tumble. We see Bulldog, obviously, as he's part of the problem. We get to see Gil, and we also get to see 3 other unnamed members of the KACL family. Later in this episode, we will get an introduction to some new members of the production side of KACL this week. But it's not going to be any of the characters we see here, who make some faces, but that's about all they do. It turns out Roz's tumble is pretty bad, and her ankle is badly sprained, which results in us seeing a new set location, Roz's apartment. Her apartment is a lot smaller than I was expecting, but that's probably in large part because I'm used to seeing Frasier's apartment. And it's a lot larger than a single-person residence like Roz's is going to be. The apartment itself is furnished with a lot of odds and ends, including a large collection of boots, and feels much more cluttered than Frasier's. This works for Roz's apartment, as there was no way she was going to have a minimalist design like Frasier's apartment. And that's not the only thing that's pretty different in their apartments. Underneath Roz's boot collection, we see she's got a nice lineup of books. And unlike Frasier's book collection, this appears to be mostly fiction, and mostly romances at that. Which makes sense for Roz, as she's always struck me as exactly the kind of woman who would be into that sort of reading material. There's one other set piece I felt is worth talking about, and that's her Elvis throw pillow. I never gave much thought to whether Roz was a fan of the King or not, but this makes it clear she is, and is something I'm hoping will get incorporated into her character at some point in the future. Also, it's just a fun set piece. Just before Bulldog shows up to visit and apologize, we get a really funny line where Frasier reminds Roz that when responding to his fan mail, not to send photos to the death threats. This and a line Frasier will have near the end of the episode are 2 of the highlights this week. They're good lines and play the strengths of Flett and Ramberg's writing. But after all the excellent lines we got in last week's episode, these 2 shining spots can't help but feel a little underwhelming on the clever line front. From there, we move into a really different scene from any we've had before. We have a prolonged scene of just Roz and Bulldog together. This is something we haven't ever seen before, even when Frasier's not the center of attention. Niles or Martin has typically gotten to steal the spotlight from him. It's never been Roz or Daphne with a secondary character before. It was at this point I realized we were moving into our first Roz-centric episode. I'm thrilled we finally got here, and I really hope we don't have to wait another 36 episodes for the next one. With that said, now we really need a Daphne-centric episode soon. As the scene wraps up, we get a funny joke about Bulldog having to paint George Foreman's toenails 4 times to get an interview with him. I like the joke, but it's far from the highlight of the interactions between the two. In the episode Whoops, where Frasier got Bulldog fired, we got to see Bulldog have his first sorta kinda character arc, where his life fell apart after he lost his job. This time out, we get to see some really nice and human moments from Bulldog, where he tells Roz what he really wants from her, and shockingly, it's all business. We've had inklings in the past that Roz and Daphne are friends outside of work, and our next scene proves it. We find the 2 women on Frasier's couch, where Daphne is massaging Roz's sprained ankle, and the 2 are chit-chatting. Again, since this is a Roz-centric outing, this is nice to see. I'm hoping, whenever we get to a Daphne-centric episode, we'll get to see some more of her and Roz having some quality time together. We also get a nice reaction from Niles this week, as usual, when Daphne said he's always dropping by and bringing her little gifts, and he doesn't mean anything by it. Heck, Niles isn't the only one to react to this. Martin makes an exasperated look as well, followed by Daphne doing it. It's always been a little unclear how much Daphne knew about Niles' infatuation with her, but this scene makes me think she's finally got a pretty good idea what's going on, even if she's not never going to say anything about it because she likes her job and might secretly like playing dumb. The conversation continues, and in an attempt at crudeness, Niles says Roz must have been playing Aeneas to Bulldog's Dido. Then he apologizes to Daphne for being so rude. Daphne says she has no idea what he's talking about. For those that are in the same boat as Daphne here, Aeneas and Dido is a reference to the opera Dido and Aeneas by Purcell, and details the love affair between Dido, the Queen of Carthage, and Aeneas, the Trojan hero. The story itself is based off one of Virgil's books, and it premiered in 1689, and became one of the earliest known operas to be written entirely in English. It's still quite popular in the opera world, and has been shown numerous times in the modern day. Frasier's picking gets to Roz, and they get into their first major fight, and it's a somewhat nasty one. They actually hurl insults at each other, including, for the first time ever, Roz telling Frasier he's not much of a doctor. If it wasn't for the surprisingly heartfelt scene earlier with Roz and Bulldog, this would be the emotional highlight of the episode. Frasier and Roz have been friends since the first episode, but this is the first time we've seen them really get into a fight. It's a realistic thing for them to fight over, and the resultant fallout of it is a lot of fun. Our next scene finds Roz has in fact gone to the dark side, and followed through with her threats, and is no longer working for Frasier. Instead, Frasier has the audio engineer, Bruce, acting as his producer. Bruce is played by Garrett Maggart. Maggart is something of an interesting actor. He hasn't had much of a career, but he did manage to star in a 4-season television series. This is only Maggart's second credited role after appearing 7 years prior in an episode of Brothers. Immediately after this small appearance, he landed a starring role in the UPN series, The Sentinel, which detailed the adventures of Detective Jim Ellison and his fight against crime, after he gained heightened senses while in the Army. The series ran for 4 seasons and 65 episodes. Following this appearance, Maggart made a handful of other one-offs over the next decade, including appearances on ER, Days of Our Lives, and CSI Miami, before retiring from the acting world with the 2010 film Vampire. Maggart is the half-brother of singers Fiona Apple and Maud Maggart. While Bruce is producing, we get our second guest caller of the week, a woman named Francesca, who is played by Rosie Perez. Perez is an interesting actress to have on as a guest caller here, because she was almost a regular on the show. Among the actresses considered for the role of Daphne, Perez was near the top of the list. Ultimately, the producers decided to go with a British caretaker instead of a Latina one, so Perez obviously didn't get the role, but it's an interesting look into what might have been. Even more interestingly, Perez will appear on the show one more time. Not as this character, but like Jo Beth Williams, as a totally different one. Granted, that won't be until season 11, so it'll be a long time yet before we talk about her again. Just because Perez didn't land the role of Daphne, it doesn't mean she's had an unsuccessful career. Perez has appeared in a lot of television shows, and is a huge "that girl who was in that thing" actress. She's been appearing regularly in television and movies since 1989, with appearances in Living Color, Pineapple Express, The Other Guys, Dora the Explorer, Birds of Prey, The Road to El Dorado, The Flight Attendant, and the American version of Your Honor. She has an impressive resume and is quickly coming up on her 100th credited acting role. She landed an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress for her role in the 1993 film Fearless. We get to see some pretty fun scenes of Roz and Bulldog working together. And honestly, they kind of make a better pair than Frasier and Roz. Frasier tends to dominate his show, while Roz feels almost like an extension of the show with Bulldog. They have a lot of nice back and forths, and Roz really gets to shine on the radio segments we see here. With Frasier, that doesn't happen so much. She just sort of screens his calls and sits back quietly. Granted, Bulldog's show is a lot more gonzo than Frasier's, so that has as much to do with it as anything. But I still love getting to see Roz in this light, and no, if it was an actual radio show, I'd pick Bulldog's over Frasier's to listen to. We get our first montage of the series, set to the song Mr. Pitiful by Otis Redding. The version heard here isn't the Otis Redding rendition of the song, but is instead the Andrew Strong version, which he sang in the 1991 film The Commitments. The montage is a lot of fun and shows all the various producers Frasier goes through while Roz is working with Bulldog. Everyone, except the old man at the end, is uncredited because they come and go so quickly without a line, which is kind of a shame. And I must say, I'm thrilled we finally got a montage here. I think montages are usually a ton of fun, they're just not something that you can always find a way to squeeze into an episode. And honestly, you wouldn't want to. Fortunately, we found the perfect way to do so here, and it worked really, really well. The final producer for the montage is a man named Ed, who has some speaking lines later in the episode, so we do know the actor's name. It is played by Edward F. Gallick. For as busy as our other guest stars this week have been in their acting careers, Gallick has not been. In fact, this is his first of only 2 acting roles, his second of which is actually a Season 7 episode of Frasier, where he'll technically play a different character, but they act virtually the same, so it's possible they were meant to be the same character, and the names just got forgotten. Gallick is our first Frasier exclusive actor, and it's really cool to get to see someone's entire filmography play out over the course of the series. After the montage, we jump to a scene in Cafe Nervosa. Not only was this surprising because we haven't seen the cafe in a while, but we get to see the full set version of the cafe, not the truncated back half we usually see when an extra set piece has been used in an episode. Given we had all the space taken up by Roz's apartment this outing, I was very surprised to see the cafe show up in its full form. Martin buys new shoes he brings to wear in Cafe Nervosa, and they're light-up shoes. Light-up shoes were first available in the US in 1992 from the company LA Gear, and they proved to be extremely popular for children. Heck, I remember having a pair myself when I was a kid, and they just blew up throughout most of the 90s. With that said, it doesn't appear LA Gear made any adult-sized shoes. So the ones Martin is wearing here must be some knockoff brand that catered to making an adult-sized shoe. If the boys knew this, they'd probably be even more horrified by what their father is wearing. We find Bulldog and Roz planning the next week's episode at Roz's apartment, which shows how well they're getting on. Roz says she scored Bulldog an interview with Wayne Gretzky. Even though Gretzky has been out of the game for 20 years, I think he's still pretty well known. Gretzky is generally considered one of, if not the greatest NHL player of all time. He played actively from 1979 right until 1999. During that time, he won 4 Stanley Cups, and actually had the waiting period waived so he could be inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame early. Dan Butler has some excellent acting here as his old bulldogness awakens when Roz says she owes him big time. His reaction is excellent and very funny. For the most part, we've gotten to see Bulldog only making a fool of himself when it comes to women, so it's a lot of fun to see him act straight up devious when he thinks Roz is interested in pursuing something with him. This, of course, leads Bulldog to literally pull out his old bag of tricks and destroy the rapport he's so carefully cultivated with Roz over the course of this episode. And yeah, we all knew Bulldog was going to blow it. It was just a matter of how and when. But it's almost a little sad to see him do it, as he and Roz just had such a great on-radio chemistry together. Frasier shows up at Roz's door to apologize just as she's chasing Bulldog out, and gets into not only the funniest, but the last line of the episode, with his patented, "I'm listening." I've praised Ramberg and Flett's writing many times before, but doggone it, this was the absolute perfect final line for the episode. Our coda is fine, but after the hilarity of the last joke, it feels kind of like it's just there. We get one more brief appearance by Gallick, as he's now acting as Bulldog's producer, and he's doing just as wonderful of a job for Bulldog as he did for Frasier. On the tie front, holy cow. Thanks to the montage, Frasier is sporting a record-crushing 8 ties this week, absolutely demolishing his prior record of 4 ties set back in Season 1, Episode 8. Of Frasier's 8 ties, only 2 of them are new. I'm pretty sure that's the case anyways. The montage ties are a little hard to see, and the second montage tie, I'm fairly sure is the Thanksgiving tie, but I'm not 100% positive. Just because we can never get a great look at it. With that said, everything else I'm sure on where it falls in the new/previously seen tie front. So the first and third ties this week are new, while the second tie is making its second appearance after last showing up in episode 5 of the season. All 5 montage ties are repeats, making anything from a second appearance to a 7th appearance. With 2 new ties this week, Frasier is up to sporting 41 different ties so far in the series. For his part, Niles only wears 2 ties. The first one is making its second appearance after last showing up in the penultimate episode of Season 1. And the second tie is new and brings Niles up to a total of 40 different ties so far in the series, and puts him just 1 tie behind Frasier. We got our very first episode where Roz is clearly the star this week, and it was great. Ramberg and Flynn on writing is exactly who I would have chosen for our first Roz solo outing, so I'm glad the producers and I were on the same page here. It's also a good call to have Burroughs on direction here to help guide a slightly different styled outing this week. Since this episode is largely from Roz's perspective, it needed to feel a little different from the episodes where they were all from Frasier's perspective, and both Burroughs and the writers just nailed that here. There's not a lot to add that we didn't already discuss. The writing and the direction are both spot on this week, especially with the excellent montage sequence. As usual, there are some great lines from all the cast, as well as excellent reaction shots from everyone when they mention Niles bringing Daphne little gifts. On top of all of that, we also got some wonderful characterization from Dan Butler's Bulldog Briscoe. When he first showed up in the second episode, he was just sort of an annoying character. We got to see some real growth during the episode Whoops, and even more so here. As much as I love seeing Roz be the star of the show on this outing, there's no denying Bulldog is pulling a strong second on star power this time out. With all the good in this episode, there's only one small weakness I feel the need to mention, and that's the pacing this week. Yes, we needed a reason for Frasier and Roz to have a fight, so Bulldog would get her to be his producer, but the setup felt a little off, particularly Roz tripping over Bulldog. It wasn't particularly funny as gags go, and it made the episode take far longer to get to the interesting parts of the episode than it needed to. With that said, the extremely strong second half of this episode more than makes up for any weakness in the first half. Despite the fact that this episode proves once and for all that you can't teach an old bulldog new tricks, it's still a very solid 8.5 out of 10 episode of Frasier.